So riding the Shimanami here. Beautiful day, a bit windy, but happy to be on the road with my really good friends from Alaska. Three of them are behind. So I just finished the Shimanami Kaido part 2. Anyway, in this video I'm gonna talk about some of the things that I thought went well, some of the things that maybe could have gone better. I will give you some of my suggestions and maybe some tips that might help some of you who are interested in one day doing the Shimanami Kaido. On this trip, I traveled with my good friends from Alaska, Joe, Ginny, and Peter. And they were a little bit older than I am. Joe just made 81 years old. So, you know, it wasn't just like the regular cycling trip. I had to think about what might be possible. Ginny just had back surgery in January. Joe had this cyst that caused pain when he walked. So there were different things about this trip. But we survived and everything went very well. And so that's a good sign that it's not the age. It's really about how much you want to do it. Yes, you have to be able to walk and to ride a bicycle, but it is possible if you choose an easier path or plan that it can be carried out. So what was different on this trip? Well, this trip we started from Imabari, not Onomichi. Onomichi is the side that has easier access, more of a larger city, the mainland of Hiroshima, whereas Imabari is on the island of Shikoku. Shikoku is very rural and in some ways a little bit depressed economically, and that's mainly because it's primarily agriculture and most of the people go to the big cities like Osaka and Tokyo to work. So my suggestion to many of you who are maybe older or just a beginner in cycling or just want to enjoy a nice cycling route that's not too difficult, not too tough, is what we did. Well, the first day we went out and we left Imabari and we went to 2 islands, but the wind was really strong. So after watching so many YouTube videos, no one mentioned about a key factor on this trip, and that was the wind. If you're going to bicycle, if you're going to cycle, you need to cycle with the wind at your back if at all possible. So that means that you plan according to the wind. So if you're taking the ferry out to an island and you're riding back to Imabari or back to Onomichi, the goal is either you ride to the ferry port or you ride back from the ferry port, but you plan to have the wind at your back, not against the wind. That was one of the major challenges that we had on this trip, was the wind. In fact, Joe and Jenny and Peter all said the same thing.
In my imagination, are we mostly riding into the wind today?
We're riding into the wind today.
We should have taken the ferry up to that
And
point
come down.
and ridden home, right? So let's consider that
Yeah.
for tomorrow. We're have to ride with the wind.
Yeah.
Make it so much easier.
It was about the wind. And so if you know which direction the wind is blowing, you can kind of mix it up, because you could take the ferry out to a place and ride back, or ride out and take the ferry back, depending on which way the wind is blowing. And another thing that you have to calculate is the distance, how far it is. I was using the Toso Shimanami maps, but even that, you really got to study it to understand how far it is, what the slope incline is, how many bridges you have to climb. It does take some pre-study to know what the best plan is. In the first day, we left Imabari and headed north, and then we hit the onward wind, which from the northeast blowing down, and that was really hard as we rode up to the, I think we went to 3 different islands. From we left Imabari, we hit Oshima, and then we hit Hakatajima. And so even those 3 islands, it was hard riding up the slope with the wind blowing in your face. Another thing is the ferries. They're not very frequent. They're like every 2 hours, and some of them they've canceled. So you have to make sure that even if it's written on like the Shimanami Toso maps, or it's written on brochures, that you confirm. And one thing that happened to me was, what was written on the Toho Shimanami map was that I had 2 options, like I think it was 1:30 and 4:30. But when I went to the terminal on the way out, they said that the first one had a circle around it on another information sheet that said it won't take bicycles. So we were stuck, and so I figured, okay, well, we have no choice. Instead of, we might have to wait 2 or 3 hours at the terminal, which we did on the first day, because that's where the ending point was, and we couldn't go on to the another terminal stop because we wouldn't have made it in time. So all of these things have to be calculated and figured out, like how much can you ride, whether you have a regular bike or e-bike, the wind, the slope incline, the physical shape of the people riding with you and yourself. So we did have a struggle on the first day. We learned better on the second day. We kind of toned it down and we went to these 4 small islands nobody talks about. I didn't see any video on these 4 islands on any YouTube videos. And then I said, I want to see something different. And so we went and we really liked it. Not actually on the main Shimanami course, but it wasn't that hard. It wasn't on the main Shimanami path. It was kind of off the beaten trail, but good for a beginner, maybe people who are older who have a hard time, riding long distances. They are now trying to promote that area, and very few cyclists go there because they usually do the main route. It's not as steep because the bridges on the islands that connect the islands are not like the high, super high suspension bridges for large ships. They're lower, so they're not as hard to get up, and the islands are close to each other, and so you can cross maybe 2 to 3 bridges in maybe a half an hour to 40-minute period, rather than riding like 2 or 3 hours to get to the next one, to the next one, to the next one. So I recommend that if you are not a real strong cyclist and you just want to get a feeling, a taste of rural Japan, rural Shikoku, you visit these 4 islands. Take the ferry out and get as close as you can from Onomichi or from Imabari, and you ride these 4 islands, and then you can maybe take the ferry back. Or if you're coming from Onomichi, you probably could ride there, but it's still a good ride, I think. You can see the small, narrow roads. You can see the people, the community. We really enjoyed meeting the people on these smaller 4 islands. People would like this kind of just sleepy little village, hang out, ride around. It was much more laid back. It was much more calm. It seemed they had time. Whenever we asked someone for help, like once we went to a market, I asked one person, 3 people came out to help us. This is that car can take us. I said, no, we can find it. The whole village wants to take us. He wants to lead us. Oh, okay, I get. Hi. 何ですか?
桟橋でしょ?
フェリー乗れるところ。あ、いや、ごめん、自転車乗せるフェリー。
高速？私そこへ行くから、あと、カモ。
Okay, わかりました。She's gonna lead us to the ferry. Thank you. Okay, I cannot refuse. I tried. Okay, we just follow her. Okay, she said, come on. I said, okay. 行きましょう.
Oh my, it's too much.
One even took us with her van. She led us to the terminal. So we had a private escort through the town of Iwagi to get to the Iwagi terminal. Thank you very much. ご親切に。
気をつけて、怪我しないように。
Take care of yourself. Don't hurt yourself. Don't hurt yourself along the way.
Okay.
Thank you, Shiroda-san. These smaller islands really give you a taste of maybe old Japan. A very genuine, authentic type of people. So I would put that on the list. Many people want to do the Shimanami just to do. And if you want to do that, you're a cyclist and just ride it. But if you want to feel the area, you want to mingle and you want to understand the area a little bit more, you need to mingle with the local people, right? Not other tourists. And these 4 islands, I think, offer a lot. Maybe even more than the Shimanami path, because they want you to come really badly. And right now, like, we took the ferry up to these islands and they're offering a discount where you don't have to pay for the bikie fee, which was 580 yen. If you have an e-bike, you have to pay the extra 100 yen because of the weight, but you still get the 580 yen off of your bike charge. We stayed at the Imabari Kokusai Hotel in Imabari. Now, the group I was with, Joe, Ginny, and Peter, they really liked this hotel very much. They thought it had everything, great breakfast, wide selection, staff was nice. They have a hot spring bath. They do charge for that. I think it was 1,100 yen. But all in all, they were very happy. So we have a French, Chinese, and Japanese restaurant, which we ate each night because Joe had a harder time walking. But they had everything that you pretty much need if you're going to stay in one place. So they were very happy. Now, in my case, I was a little more critical, and I would say that it is the nicest hotel in Imabari. However, the level of service and attention to detail probably is still about maybe one step down from like bigger cities like Osaka or Kyoto or Tokyo. So just keep that in mind. I thought that they could have upped their game a little bit more. and the building, the facility itself is a little bit old. So I'm not saying it's run down, but it's a little bit old, and you can tell there's some wear and tear. But that was the nicest hotel in Imabari. And from there, that was our takeoff point. We rented bikes at the Giant Shop. Now there's two main stores, it looks like, at the station. And I'm sure there might be a couple others around Imabari, but we wanted e-bikes. And what they told me at Onomichi, which is the same company, was that I could rent e-bikes from their sister branch. But when I called, they said I couldn't. And the e-bikes there was about maybe 30% less than what Giant charged us. Giant is a private company. They're both right across from each other at the station. But anyway, we wanted e-bikes, so we had to go to Giant. You know, I think it was about 10,000 yen a day roughly. So 20,000 yen for 2 days. So seems a bit high, but that's what the cost was. I think at the other shop, it was somewhere 7,000 each day, so a little bit cheaper. Also though, the difference was at the Giant Shop, they gave you the charger, and if you wanted to go on the Shimanami and stay somewhere and then come back, you could. Whereas if you rented an e-bike from the competitor, you would have to bring the bike back that day and recharge it and set up a new contract for the next day. So it's kind of cumbersome. But anyway, so there's many different smaller challenges that you have to think about. For example, the Giant Shop, they closed on Tuesday. I couldn't believe it. Fortunately, our reservation was for Sunday, Monday. And if we had gone to Tuesday, you can't return the bike. You have to return it by Monday. That means that you would lose that day. Or if you come in on Tuesday, or I mean, if you want to rent on Tuesday, you can. So you have to plan according to when their store is open. Another thing was, there were like 5 different repair shops, and they were all closed on Sunday. So what if something happens along the way and you need to have your bike repaired right away? You couldn't get it done. So it was kind of random. Like different shops had different days off. Now you think if you're gonna do tourist industry business, that you need to be open 7 days a week, at least during the season, like spring to the end of fall, right? But that's not how it is out in Shimanami, in Imabari. I think Onomichi, the shop was open every day. So that's another thing you have to plan around is, do they close? Or if they do close, when do they close? So you can plan your trip. And there are other things that I felt were not really convenient. Again, as I said before in my earlier video, it's not convenient in rural Japan. City Japan, Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto, big cities, right on, bang, 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 bang. But rural Japan, their game is still on the lower level. So just expect that. You know, I really like the people, the rural life. But when it comes to convenience and systems and processes, they're still quite behind. And one more thing that I did notice is the level of service in the rural areas. They're nice, but it's not at the same level as cities. It's even the service level is probably 1, even 2 notches down. For example, taxi drivers. It's the first time in Japan that I met taxi drivers that were so unfriendly. You know, they weren't mean or rude. They just never said thank you. They never said hello. Kind of grunted sometimes. So it was the first time in Japan I experienced that, and it was only in Imabari. So I can only say, after riding, how many did we ride? Maybe 6. We rode the taxi 6 times, and I saw basically the same attitude of all the taxi drivers. Service in Imabari is maybe 1 to 2 notches down, especially the taxi drivers. Kind of sad, especially when you're economically depressed. You probably want to try harder to bring the tourists there, but it was the opposite. It was like this was the norm. So my friend said that for them it was great, and they're from America, so maybe compared to America, you know, and it wasn't bad, the hotel. It was just, I could see a lower level of attention to detail and being able to anticipate guest needs, the so-called omotenashi. Oh, so all in all, it was a great ride. I got to see my friends from Alaska. I haven't seen them in years. That part was all great. It was just things like the wind, the ferry system was a little inconvenient, making sure you could get back, so you had to time it, which ferry took bikes, which ferry didn't take bikes. But I will say that we were on a ferry going out, and so I asked that we want to come back on an earlier ferry, but it says it has a circle around it that you cannot load bikes on that. We have to wait until 4:30 instead of 1:30, which is a big difference, right? Because the ferries are quite infrequent. That's another problem. But the guy, he was kind of gruff and rough. He hesitated, and then I talked to him and I tried to say, my friend Joe is 81 years old and we're not sure we can make it back and we want to go back on an earlier ferry. He was nice enough to say, okay. But when we got to the town of Iwaki, I was ready to tell them that, this guy said that we could load the bikes on because it was a ferry that you weren't supposed to be able to load the bikes. But nobody checked or said anything. Just like, go. And then after we loaded our bikes, got on, the next ferry stop, 6 other cyclists got on with their bicycles. So I thought, I thought this was not supposed to be for bicycles, and we had a special exception, but they got on. So I don't know what the exact rule is. I think that's the major problem for tourists who come to visit or cycle the Shimanami. But also for Japanese, nobody seems to know all the information. Like the 4 islands that I suggest that you visit. When I asked like the terminal lady, I asked anybody about these 4 islands. Everyone said, oh, I've never been there, so I don't know. I said, how far is between the islands? How high are the bridges? What's the wind direction? Nobody knew, except the ferry employee. So I think you have to ask the ferry employee for wind direction, other things. But already you're deciding to go, right? You already kind of have a plan. That I think was one of the biggest challenges, is trying to figure out ferry times, wind direction, can I or can I not load bikes on, and try to find out, like, I have to get to a certain ferry terminal by a certain time. Can I get there in time? And depends who you're riding with. You have an e-bike or regular bike. All these things take critical thinking. So it's not just like set for you, just jump on a bike and ride the Shimanami. You gotta plan all of these. Now, if you're a strong cyclist and you're just gonna ride from Onomichi to Imabari, 75 kilos, great, no problem. But if you want to see the area and you're not a true cyclist and you want to enjoy the people, the local cuisine, the local area, you want to stop along the way, I would suggest making a more reasonable plan that allows you to have options to either return by ferry or to go out by ferry. It makes it a little bit easier. Or go out but come back. You don't have to go from Onomichi to Imabari or Imabari to Onomichi. Or a lot of people, they stay halfway. But what I also found, and this is me again, is that the lodging in between, I only stayed at one place, but what I saw on the internet is that it doesn't seem to be that private or that comfortable. It's very basic, more like a minshuku or a simple B&B hostel type. Many times it doesn't have a private bath. And so if you're more into a little bit more luxury, or you want a private bath, and maybe you have to stay in the bigger cities like Onomichi or Imabari. And I think there's a couple really expensive, nice hotels in the middle islands, but it's gonna cost you. So maybe 20 to 30 kilometers while stopping along the way, taking photos, taking video. Especially if you're a YouTuber and you want to take photos and video, I would highly suggest you break up your trip into 2 or 3 days, unless you have pressure that you gotta ride and then you gotta keep going because you gotta reach your destination. And if you don't have an e-bike, even more difficult. I realized that the e-bike has 3 speeds, eco, normal, and sport, and makes a complete difference when going up hills and against the wind. But like even on the first day, that we had some trouble with the wind. Even going with sport function, the winds are so strong, going uphill was really, really challenging. You have to really think of all these variables. Now, I'm not trying to discourage anybody because again, I'd come back here and do this tomorrow if I had a chance. But it does take a lot of thinking, and every time I come to the Shimanami, I learn a little bit more what's possible, what's not, what I would like to do. And now after 2 trips, I would recommend that you break up your tour into smaller circular routes that you go and you come back and return to your city, whether it's Imabari or whether it's Onomichi, if you want to stay in a nicer hotel or lodging that has a private toilet and bath. That's up to you. Or you stay halfway and you can keep going. But then you have all the other issues like other rental shop that you have to bring back the e-bike if you have an e-bike and recharge it at the same shop. Initially they told me, oh, you can take it over and you can return the e-bike at Imabari. But then later on I found out you cannot do that. Then they also told me you can rent an e-bike from Imabari from their shop. And when I called, I couldn't. I had to change to Giant. So the information, there's no consistent information many of the time. And what somebody says or what this brochure says or what this information sheet says, it's not the same or it's changing. And that's what makes riding the Shimanami so complicated or confusing at times. Nobody knows all the information. The information seems to be different at different places on different forums, and different people know different things. So for me, I found out the person who knows the most about like those 3-4 islands was the ferry drivers, because they do it every day. He told me how to ride, about how long it would take. When we landed and we asked people, how far is it from this side to this side? They all said, oh, far. We go like, what? I thought it was close. But their far was about 10 kilometers, which is about 6 miles, which is not that far, but maybe for their perspective, that's far. But for us, 10 kilometers kilometers in 2 hours, no problem, right? So there's a lot to process when you are riding the Shimanami. If you could speak Japanese, I had someone with you that could speak Japanese. It's very helpful. Even if I speak some Japanese, it still was very, very challenging at times. I think that's part of the challenge of the Shimanami, is working through all of these different issues, these random things that come up that you have to deal with. And of course, weather is always a big thing. And if the rain is the worst, you don't even want to go out. The wind is what we really dealt with this time. Also, if it's cold, you know, and in the summer it might be almost too hot. All those other things you have to deal with. How much food to bring, or how much drink to bring, or now from Imabari out, I found there were a lot more convenience stores. But when I came from the Onomichi side, from the first island, I didn't see anything. I think maybe one shop. I don't know. There was a convenience store. I don't know if it was on the first island or the second island. Almost nothing the first couple of islands. But the Imabari side, there was enough along the way. So again, it depends on which side you stay and what side you leave from. It does take a lot of planning. You should plan. You need to be flexible, whether it's the weather or the wind direction or what you think. So you may end up changing your plan like we did. The second day we completely changed the plan.